Hello. You probably don't need me to tell you that Jenga is a phenomenally successful family game. A game where dexterity, hand-to-eye coordination, and tactical play can all mean next to nothing if you get just a little bit too clumsy. Over the past 40 years, this game of wooden blocks and tower reconstruction has sold more than 80 million copies, comprised of somewhere in the region of 4.3 billion bricks. So, this is a game that has seen almost unrivaled success. I guess the real question is, did Games Workshop invent it? I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're building the history of Jenga. Well, did they? No, not really. They did, though, create something that was almost Jenga, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Jenga was created by Leslie Scott in 1983, and that's had a bit of a tumultuous history of its own. So before we cover both that game and the Games Workshop rival to Jenga, why don't you give this video a like, and then we can jump in. In 1982, almost a year before Jenga made its debut, Games Workshop launched a brand new block-building game at the London Toy and Hobby Fair. The game was called Tower Blocks, and it required players to remove blocks from the constructed tower, only to then have to place them on top without knocking the thing over. In design and gameplay, Tower Blocks is almost identical to Jenga, with the exception of the orientation of the blocks in the tower. Instead of laying them flat, the blocks stand on the shorter sides, making for a taller, arguably less stable, and therefore theoretically more exciting structure. The only other difference is that the Tower Blocks box includes just 39 bricks, compared to Jenga's 54. Unfortunately for the Games Workshop, Tower Blocks failed to generate any interest. It didn't build a following, and it was shelved pretty soon thereafter. According to Ian Livingston, there may be as few as 300 copies produced out in the wild, so it may be one of the rarest Games Workshop games ever made. And yet, within 12 months, a new game would join the ranks of the classics like Monopoly and Cluedo, and go on to be one of the biggest selling games ever made. Jenga is more or less identical in design and play, but it is a phenomenon. So, what happened there? Leslie Scott, the creator of Jenga, used to work at Intel in the UK, designing games to help staff members remember details about new products. Speaking about the origins of Jenga, Scott has said, "I would love to be able to pinpoint the precise eureka moment in which the game was fashioned from a collection of handmade wooden blocks, but I can't, because I don't think any such moment took place." Many years before her time at Intel, while growing up in Ghana, Scott and her family would play a simple version of the game that would become Jenga, using piles of her brother's building blocks. The game became a family staple, and by 1974 they had had specially made bricks produced by a carpenter in the Ghanaian port city of Takaradi. The Scotts would give sets of these bricks to family friends, and the so-called takaradi bricks even made their way into the home of the British High Commissioner. Whilst the Scott family were playing their tower building game with bricks produced by local craftsmen, another family also claimed to have encountered the same bricks, or at least some very similar ones, but with a much older history. In the late 70s, the Parson family brought from Ghana to the USA a building game that used wooden blocks arranged in layers of 3, and which would see players attempt to remove blocks and add them to the top of the stack. In the same way as Tower Blocks, which may even have been inspired by this game, the blocks are stacked on their sides rather than flat as in Jenga. The Parsons would call the game takaradi, and it originated, they say, as an old West African game, but information on such a game seems sparse. In fact, information about the Parsons game itself is also limited, with few details to be found online. Board Game Geek even contradicts the official webpage for the game, presenting a release date of 1976, when takaradi.com says it was introduced to the US in 1978. The official site doesn't include much history in their History of the Game section either. Instead, it makes several comparisons to the cheap manufacture of their more famous rival. Despite this lack of detail, there does seem to be general consensus online that the Parsons game of takaradi, which the family still produce and sell, predates a release of either Tower Blocks or Jenga, though Leslie Scott has gone on record disputing claims that there was a traditional Ghanaian building block game, or in fact any other historical equivalent, saying, There is no mention of such a game in any literature, folklore, or anthology of games. Whatever the slightly confusing history of takaradi may be, it's undisputed that both it and Jenga were born in Ghana, and it's also clear that the game of building wooden block towers would find its place in the wider world thanks to the efforts of Leslie Scott. But it wouldn't be for several more years that Scott came up with the now familiar name for the game, borrowing and shortening the Swahili word for build, kujenga. Having introduced the handmade family sets of Jenga to her friends while she was now living in England, Scott received regular compliments about and requests to play the game at parties. She sensed that there was something more to the game and took the opportunity of a college fundraiser at Oxford University to gain some more feedback. With all signs pointing to the positive, Scott trademarked the Jenga name, but couldn't afford a patent for the actual design of the game itself. She secured the services of Camp Hill Village Trust in Yorkshire to manufacture the first commercial sets of Jenga. The charitable trust still exists today and provides support for adults with learning disabilities, mental health problems, and autism, with the vision to help everyone to lead a life of opportunity. It was the team at the trust that decided to introduce a new finish to the wooden blocks, which afforded the game with an additional level of inconsistency and challenge. They came up with this idea of tumble polishing them. When you very lightly tumble polish, it puts a nice sheen on them. It smooths the edges, but it doesn't smooth them totally. It introduces another level of slight inconsistency, so it's really clever. The game was formally launched at the 1983 London Toy and Hobby Fair, just a year after Games Workshop's Tower Blocks had made its unspectacular debut at the same event. The launch was followed by the first Jenga Championship a couple of weeks later, for which Scott had been able to secure the Oxford Times as a sponsor. For whatever reason, the game just didn't stack up though. Like Tower Blocks before it, there was little initial interest, and Scott and her family had to take out loans in order to continue producing the game through her new company, Leslie Scott Associates. In '84, Californian entrepreneur Robert Griebler, the brother of one of Scott's close friends, expressed an interest in importing the game into North America, and Scott eventually signed the Canadian and the US distribution rights over to him. Then, in late 1985, Griebler asked for worldwide distribution rights as well, and given the precarious financial position the game had put Scott into by that point, she agreed, signing over the global rights to produce, market, and sell Jenga. Griebler, along with two cousins, founded a new company, Poconobo Associates, who then licensed production of the game to another company, Irwin Toy, who would shortly thereafter be bought out by Hasbro. At the Toronto Toy Fair in 1986, future Hasbro chairman Alan Hassenfield had reportedly said of Jenga, "We have to have it," and within the year, they did. Hasbro invested in a significant relaunch for the game in 1987, pushing a new ad campaign and putting a lot of money behind it. From there on out, the rest, as they say, is Jenga.
What's this?
Huh? Oh, it's nothing.
Nothing?
No, okay, it's a game, Jenga, but
how do you
please
play?
don't get started. You take a piece off the bottom, you put it on the top, but don't. Eat, talk, circulate, don't play the game.
Come on, Charlie, you got the fastest hands in the room.
Yes. Food! Limbo contest!
Careful.
That's the best move I've seen you make all night, Helen.
Alan, not Jenga again.
Alan! I wasn't playing, I swear.
Jenga. Once you touch it, you can't keep your hands off it.
In 2020, the game and its creator Leslie Scott were recognised by the National Museum of Play in New York in their National Toy Hall of Fame. Curator Nicholas Ricketts described the game. Fans say that much of Jenga's success lies in its simplicity and ability to be played by almost anyone. It is one of the rare games that's equally fun for two people or a bigger crowd. It's perfect for a game party with a group or something more intimate, but either way, it's always sure to make instant memories. In an interview with the Oxford Science blog around the same time, Leslie Scott reflected on an unintended aspect of the game's enduring appeal. "I didn't deliberately intend it to be a cooperative game, but if you watch people playing, once the tower gets beyond a certain height, most people end up wanting it to get higher, so it becomes almost like a team effort in a funny way. Nobody deliberately wants it to fall over, so on one hand, it could be considered a very competitive game, On the other hand, there's actually quite surprisingly cooperative play involved. It's thrilling when you're teetering at 30 layers already, and it's terrifying when it comes back to you. So, Jenga became a household name, a game that you can play on the dining room table, or with truth or dare bricks, or in a pub garden with enormous blocks. Meanwhile, Tower Blocks, the suspense building game, has largely been forgotten. In his book Dice Men, Games Workshop co-founder Ian Livingston lamented, "We still wonder what might have been if only we'd shown Tower Blocks to the right licensing agent at the right time." Leslie Scott tells the story of creating Jenga and the business lessons she learned from it in her 2009 book about Jenga. She describes the playing of a game or the creating and running of a business with the same kind of language, and talks about how if you want to overcome in either, you'll be in need of the same thing. A propensity to see the way around, over or through obstructions, and a penchant for the perpetual challenges will keep you speeding on your exciting voyage to success. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this exploration of two very similar games that lived very different lives. I certainly had a lot of fun stacking up the history. If you ever played Tower Blocks, and I can't believe there's many of you, but if you did, why not leave a comment below and let us know if it was any fun? But if you are a Jenga fan, why not share your favourite memory of playing the game? I would love to hear those too. If you want to support me in making more histories of more games, then feel free to check out my Patreon, my Ko-fi, or even join my Discord. I've put links to all three in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. The irony, of course, is that one of the best games GW ever made has always been stacking blocks. Or boxes. But if these guys fall over, it's probably going to cost you a little bit.